It's Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance, and we are continuing our roadshow throughout the state of California. Today we are in beautiful Ventura, California. It's my pleasure to be here, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Matthew Fienup. He is an economist at Cal Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks, and he focuses on land use policy and water policy. And boy, you are busy, my friend. You are very busy. I want to speak with you about what's kind of in the zeitgeist, in the culture speak, about water. We hear this perception, this figure, that ag uses about 80% of the water in the state. We use about 20%. Is that the whole story?
Yeah, I think that's the number that's the headline number you read in the newspapers, and I think it's pretty misleading. There's actually three really important categories of water use in California. Obviously, agriculture is a big one, and urban use, which includes cities and industrial users of water. But the environment actually uses 50% of all of the water in the state.
What does that mean, the environment?
Yep. Well, so what it actually means is that first of all, we allocate water to environmental uses. That means we might require stream flows at a certain rate during certain times of year to maintain migrating fish populations. It might mean that we actually mandate releases of water from reservoirs in California.
So we have heard about this whole debate that we're preferring fish over farmers through what you're describing, these releases.
Yep.
Is that fair? Are fish being preferred over farmers in this allocation that you've described?
What I would say is that there is a tremendous tension in the current policy between farmers and fish, and that the way we allocate water in this case is we simply curtail water use by agricultural communities. And in that case, they are directly taking water away from farmers.
So why is it that in the conservation debate, so we're asking ag to curtail, although some would say we're not asking them enough, but that's another conversation.
Sure.
We know Governor Brown has proposed mandatory restrictions on you and I, 25%. So we're asking, I guess you could say, 50% of the water used to curtail. Are we asking the environment to curtail?
So there have been some curtailments just in the last year in environmental use, but those stream flows and mandated dam releases have actually continued through most of the 4 years of the drought.
But those curtailments, it seems as if when they may or may not happen, the courts will get involved, and the courts, and again, I'm not taking a position, but seem fairly protective of environmental use of water.
Yes, that's true. Yep, that's very true. And in fact, here in Ventura County, we had a Endangered Species Act decision related to the southern steelhead trout, and they are actually now restricted the ability of local growers to divert water off of the Santa Clara River for recharging groundwater basins.
So how then, if the 50% doesn't appear to be subject to a reduction, how do we get to meaningful reductions when the 30%, which is ag, it's not clear? I mean, there's no mandate of reduction. They may be engaging in strategies, but it's only the 20%. Where there's a mandate, and we want 20% of 25%, or is it even 20? Is it 10? Is it 50, 40, 10? Or
it's about 50% environmental, 40% ag.
So it's actually 50, 40, 10. So think about that. So 10% of the water.
So I have two thoughts about that. Number one, it's important to realize actually that curtailment of agricultural water use actually began well in advance of the drought. So for about a decade, and again, related largely to environmental issues, they've been under curtailment. You know, there are cities in part of the Great Central Valley that have not received water deliveries from the State Water Project for years, even in advance of the drought. So they've been under curtailment. They have been cutting back for quite a while. The other one I want to just throw in here is that I think that tension is the creation of policy of the way that we allocate water. We see systems of allocation in other parts of the country and in other parts of the world where we allocate water efficiently between those three uses, and both farmers and the environment are made better off.
So why do we have this allocation system? Is it based upon water rights that were created 100 years ago?
Yeah, that's the bottom line, yes. Yeah, and so we, again, just to highlight a system that does it very differently. In Australia, some news has been generated around the Millennium Drought, 1994 to 2009, that they had. It was a drought an order of magnitude worse than the one we're suffering here in California. And in the 80s, prior to their drought, they started to implement voluntary water trading. In the 90s, they liberalized water markets and actually separated the ownership of water from the ownership of land, so that water...
Those are fighting words in California.
So that water could trade on a market. And that equipped them to actually allow water users to make complex decisions about allocation, so that under a critical drought, they could still allocate water to environmental use, they could support the agricultural communities, and they could actually avoid the most severe urban water restrictions. And that happened by the price of water increasing dramatically during the drought, which constrains the demand for water dramatically. And then it allows, by assigning a value to water, it lets water users decide which uses they actually want to engage in.
But if we engage in that system, given that we're the salad bowl to America, that could cause a tremendous ripple effect in the grocery stores.
Yeah, we could definitely see temporarily, we could see food prices go up. In the case of Australia, there were regions in the Australian agricultural industry where 60 to 100% of acreage was fallowed during the 4 driest years of the drought. Food had to be imported into those regions during that time.
Do you think our state, our country is ready for that dramatic solution?
I actually don't think that we would see the produce section at the local grocery store impacted that much, because a lot of the low value produce that's produced in California is things like alfalfa and rice, which in some cases we're growing in the desert.
Right.
And a lot of that,
they're very thirsty.
Yes, that's right, very thirsty. And a lot of that produce is not going into the grocery store. In fact, we're loading it on tanker ships, and to the order of hundreds of thousands of tons a year, shipping that alfalfa and the water that it contains to Asia and other destinations.
So it begs the question, there has been discussion about what crops are being grown in this state. And should we be growing alfalfa? Should we be growing pistachios, wine grapes, which are notoriously thirsty?
Yeah, so wine grapes actually is a pretty efficient use of water, it turns out, relative to some other ones. Alfalfa, rice obviously is not an efficient...
It needs to be flooded.
Yeah. And there's other things. Berry production is really big in California in the last decade or so, and berries are water-hungry plants. But I think that if we actually allowed a functioning price mechanism to set the value for water, the actual crops that farmers found economically profitable to grow would be different than the ones we see. I think we'd still grow wine, we'd still grow berries, but I think that the rice and alfalfa production would change.
So how do you intend to perpetuate your model throughout the great state of California?
Well, yeah, obviously what I'm talking about here, and by the way, it's worth mentioning, this is how we allocate every other scarce resource known to man, whether it's gasoline or coffee beans, right? And I could cite dramatic price swings in both of those markets in the last few years. But we use a price mechanism to coordinate the demand for a scarce good with the available supply in that year.
Have you spoken with friends in Sacramento about this?
Yeah, well, so I understand this would require a total regime change.
Right.
And I also realize it would require that Sacramento actually cede authority over allocation to water users, which is scary for a lot of people. So I realize this is politically infeasible, perhaps. And if that's the case, then what we're going to see is adjudication and litigation of water rights become increasingly important in the state. And you're aware, I know, that there were 2 important water rights cases determined just in the last 3 weeks.
That deal with those issues.
One in San Juan Capistrano, one in Ventura.
You'll come back when we come back?
Yep.
His name is Matthew Fienup. He is an economist at Cal Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks, California. I am in Ventura, California today on one of our road shows. Thank you for watching us on Charter California Edition.